Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 9:30 p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta, Wednesday night, September the 8th, and I'm glad to be here. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is Up to Us, 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. Chat room is open if anybody would like to sit in there. And, just appreciate everybody who's tuning into my shows. I really thank you all for listening to me day after day after day, talking about child abuse, the issues surrounding it, and adult survivor issues and whatnot. So thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. I want to continue looking at neglect. We'll probably try to finish this one up this week. But this PDF that I found is just the information is just so good, so good to know the signs and symptoms of neglect, what the causes really are, and what attributes to neglect, and how to prevent it, what I mean, so that we can, look out for the children in our own world, in our own lives, to make sure they're not being neglected and abused. So oftentimes we hear people, and I myself, because I'm an advocate standing up for child rights and standing up against child abuse, I will quite often just say child abuse, let's stop child abuse, right? And I don't throw in neglect, and I think we need to, child abuse and neglect, that's what it is. Neglect is the bigger, most common form of child abuse, and it's just that it's not talked about that much because mainly people are more concerned about the whole physical aspect of child abuse, and the sexual aspect. The different types of abuse are considered to be more serious, more life-threatening, right? Which is the physical abuse, the child sexual abuse, but the neglect is just as deadly and just as horrific, really. And just as damaging to children, right? And so it's so important to know what is neglect, and what are the signs and symptoms of neglect, and how can we prevent it, and what can we do within our own communities, within our own families, to make sure that the children in our lives are not being neglected and not being mistreated and maltreated and abused, right? So that's why I want to look at this article again, and we'll finish it up pretty soon. It's such good information. I'll give you the link. It's www.childwelfare.gov/pubs, P-U-B-S, /user manuals, /neglect/neglect.pdf. And that's how you can get to that actual PDF download. We're on page 43, parenting and problem-solving skills. But we left off with on Monday night with domestic violence and neglect, the issues that surround neglect. If there's domestic violence in the home, it can cause neglect for children and cause children to be neglected. So now we're looking at problem-solving skills and parenting. This is from the Child Abuse and Neglect User Manual series. It's called Child Neglect, a Guide for Prevention, Assessment, and Intervention. And it was put out by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, Administration on Children, Youth and Families, Children's Bureau, Office on Child Abuse and Neglect. It was put out in 2006 by Diane DePanfilis, DePanfilis. And so it's not that old, 2006, some of the stuff we see out there is from 1992 or 1987. So, it's actually not all that old, and it's some good information. It's 112 pages long, this PDF, and so I don't think we're going to go into the whole thing. But I just wanted to touch on the main points of what is neglect, how do we prevent it? What can we do to look out for the children in our own lives, It's just so important to get this information. Really, education, I believe, is the key. So, I'm not a professional counselor, therapist. I don't hold any counseling certificates, therapist certificates. I'm just a private citizen paying to do these blog talk shows, right? I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. And, it's my goal to work as hard as I can for the rest of my life to stop child abuse and neglect, right? And so this is why I study continually, and I'm always looking into stuff. And I thought, why not pass it on while I'm doing that? I was taking courses at MRU here in Calgary a while back. This has been probably a while now. It's been over a year since I've been able to, at least a year since I've been able to go to take any courses. I just can't afford them right now. So I'm in between classes, and I was studying international community development, child rights, human rights, and whatnot. And could not afford to go any longer, so I was still studying, because I planned on going back, and I do still plan on going back. I thought, well, I better stay current, and I better continue to study while I'm not going, right? So this is what I do, and so, I thought, well, I'll just pass on the information, and if anybody wants to tune in, they can, and I appreciate everybody who's listening to my shows. It's just awesome. And I know there's so many advocates standing with me, so many people out there who are fighting to save children's lives and who are, in their own way, doing their own things to advocate for children, to stand up for children, to try to stop child abuse, right? So I know so many advocates who listen to my shows, and I thank you so much. So many counselors and therapists and whatnot have tuned into my shows, and just all kinds of great friends and people in my life have been listening to my shows, so thank you so much. So I want to get right into this article. If you're a young person under the age of 18, I ask that you have permission to listen to my shows. Really, this is ultimately about stopping child abuse and helping children, but the whole issue is that there's a lot of adult content on my shows, and so I'm all about protecting children, and I think it's important that children have permission to listen to my shows and these types of shows, because you want to protect yourself at all times. There are so many child sexual predators out there trying to get a hold of children online at any given time, in the hundreds of thousands. So, you have to protect yourself when you're online. You have to know what you're listening to, and it's a good idea, or what you're doing in a chat room, right? It's a good idea to have permission and have an older adult, someone who you trust and who's proven themselves trustworthy, who cares about you and what you're doing, to sort of check in on it to make sure that it's okay and to keep you safe, right? Because you can keep yourself safe by getting the information as well. You can type into your browser online safety for children, child online safety, internet safety, family internet safety, anything like that will bring up websites regarding on how to keep yourself safe when you're online, for young people. As I have no idea how young the people are listening to my shows, right? So you want to keep yourself safe and keep yourself protected, because there's so many really sick people out there who are looking to get a hold of children, and they'll do anything they can, including saying that they're a 12-year-old boy or girl, and they want to meet you someplace at a school or at a mall somewhere and just be friends, and they like to skateboard, and they love Xbox, they love to play video games and whatnot, or whatever you call those things now. And they'll have all the latest information. They know the latest music that all the kids are listening to. They know all the popular stuff that all the kids know. And then it turns out you meet them there, and it's an adult, 30-year-old child sexual predator who gets a hold of these children and sexually assaults them and or abuses them and then could kill them, right? So you want to keep yourself safe, and do not use your real name when you're online. Do not ever tell anyone where you live, what school you go to, your teacher's name, your telephone numbers. Never phone anyone, because then they have caller ID and they can get your number. Don't give away any information because you want to protect yourself and you want to protect your family, right? So it's so important to get that information. So we'll just get right on with this article here, and this is parent or caregiver factors, in regards to neglect, right? And it says, I'm just reading right from the page here, so you can go there too. And I have a good friend in the chat room here tonight. Hello, Storm Chaser. And yeah, I like those icons. He's got some really cool icons on there, typing and waving and laughing. That's awesome. Yeah, it's great for you to be here. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. This is important stuff here, parent or caregiver factors. It says some parental or caregiver characteristics associated with child neglect include problematic childhoods. Okay, we kind of went over this. Neglectful mothers are 3 times more likely to have been sexually abused than mothers who do not neglect their children. And it says, however, the majority of individuals who are maltreated as children do not maltreat their own children. So that's true. I think we had kind of looked at this part, actually. And they said that, that's right, we did look at that. So that's not always true. Many times people who have been abused do not go on to abuse their children, right? Some do, and that's the cycle of abuse, right? What I wanted to look at tonight here was parenting and problem-solving skills. This is important. Parents need to have the cognitive resources to care adequately for a child. They also need certain educational abilities, such as literacy, to be able to care properly for their child. For example, to read prescription labels on their child's medication. Studies have found links between child neglect and parents' poor problem-solving skills, poor parenting skills, and inadequate knowledge of childhood development. And we're on page 43 of this PDF. It says parents who are unaware of the developmental and cognitive abilities of children at different ages may have unrealistic expectations and be more likely to neglect their children. And this is kind of true in all cases regarding child abuse, any type of child abuse, whether it's physical, verbal, psychological, emotional, sexual, you name it. A lot of times parents just don't have the knowledge of the different developmental stages of children, and they have these unrealistic expectations of these children. They think, oh, this, my child should be, able to not be, they should be potty trained by now. They should be not wetting the bed. They should be this and that. So they lash out at their children or neglect their children because of this, right? Without getting the information on just where, how children behave depending on at what point they're at in their developmental stages, right? So it's so important for parents to get that information. There's tons and tons of information out there for parents. If you're struggling and you're just wondering, why is my child doing this? Instead of lashing out at your child, get the information and learn what's going on with your child at these different stages in their lives, and you can help them, right? And then everything's great. Instead of abusing them because they're not doing what a parent thinks that they should be doing, or because they may not be capable of that, right? They might not be cognitive enough. They might not be capable enough. So it says, for example, a parent might, I'm just going to scroll right up to the top here, expect that a 4-year-old child can be left alone for the evening because of unrealistic expectations of the child's abilities. So studies also have found that parents who are inconsistent with discipline or use harsh or excessive punishment can be at risk for neglecting their children. And isn't that the truth? Anything that hurts a child is abuse. Anything that intentionally harms a child is abuse. Or the inaction, it's an action or inaction to get a child, to safety or to help a child, right? If you don't help a child, that's abuse, right? When you know you should. If you hurt a child unintentionally and harm them, that's abuse, right? So many times people just, they're just inconsistent with their discipline, or they're just too harsh or too excessive in their punishments, dishing out to their children. And, children, they're not punching bags, they're not whipping posts, right? These are living, precious beings that, little people, that do not deserve to be treated like that. For every time, I don't like, I don't to promote the eye to eye thing, like eye for an eye thing, right? But what I think would be really interesting is every time a parent lashes out at their child and hurts their child on purpose, whether they beat them or slap them or burn them or something, then if the parent could experience the pain that the child is going through, I think it would just be wonderful. And even the heartbreak. The heartbreak is actually the most important thing that I think a parent should experience when they do this stuff to their children, because too often people just don't think about what they're doing and they lash out and they hit their kids or beat on them or, just really harshly discipline them. And it'd be just great to see that turned over onto the parent so the parent could know exactly what their child is feeling, and then they might sort of stop doing that. But unfortunately, that's not the way it is. And so, two wrongs don't make a right. I'm very much a promoter of that. But it's just that it would be great if it was just automatic. So, if a parent, punched their child in the head or something, if all of a sudden the parent would feel the same pain that the child was just because of some sort of connection between the child-parent thing, like some sort of, futuristic look at the whole thing maybe, it would be great, because then the parent could sit there and know exactly what that child's going through in their mind, in their heart, and in their physical well-being. A lot of abuse would probably stop, because every time a parent abused a child, they would feel the same thing, and I think they would eventually stop, right? But it's quite sad that that's just not the case, right? So we have to get people to use their better judgment when they're disciplining their children, because it's a lot of times not discipline, it's abuse, right? And the parent thinks, oh, I'm just disciplining my child, without realizing that they're hurting and harming their children. So, because children do need discipline, but they need proper discipline, and they need teaching. They don't need harsh punishment. What they need is they need to be taught. They need to learn. They're just little sponges, and they just need direction. They need guidance. They need advice. And if the parents aren't doing a good job of it, well, then you got some bad problems, right? Because so many parents out there, sadly, are just not good parents, and that's all there is to it. Probably a lot of it's just that they didn't learn how to properly parent because they were not properly parented. A lot of times people grow up with parents that have no clue how to parent, and so the child grows up not knowing a thing about parenting, because children only really know what they're taught around them, right? That's what a child's experiences are. Their life is built upon the experiences that are surrounding them. And so, it's sad, but it's the whole cycle of abuse and the cycle of bad, poor parenting, you know what I mean? And I'm a prime example of that. So if I had children, I would definitely want to take parenting classes. I would have to, because I would feel the need and the necessity for it, because I was not nurtured as a child and I don't understand how to, I don't have that built-in type of thing going on, you know what I mean? As much as I know that it's wrong to hurt a child, I still would want to get because I broke the cycle, see, so that's the whole issue. But I would still want the parenting classes, because I have no concept of what it is to how to behave properly as a parent. You know what I mean? Except for what I read on these websites. But I'm talking the natural stuff that as a child grows and they see their caregivers and their parents and the way that they behave towards each other, the way that they problem solve, the way that they handle things and deal with things. That's how the child will grow up. And so if a child doesn't grow up in a functioning family with, everybody's getting along and they're coping, and the parents teach their children how to cope and how to get through things, how to deal with things properly, if a child doesn't see that, they're not going to know how to do it, right? And because it's something that has to start from day one, and so it's so important that parents get this information and learn how to properly parent their child, and everything would just be so much better, right? It's quite unfortunate, because who pays the price? The children do, right? Every time. It says here, as would be expected, having parents who are engaged with their children and involved in their activities and education acts as a protective factor. So, the more involved and engaged, the parents are, obviously, the more, the less chance of neglect and abuse is there, right? Substance abuse. Reported rates of substance abuse by maltreating parents vary. Neglect, however, has the strongest association with substance abuse among all forms of maltreatment. One study found that children whose parents abused alcohol and other drugs were more than 4 times more likely to be neglected than children whose parents did not. So one study found that children whose parents abused alcohol and other drugs were more than 4 times more likely to be neglected than children whose parents did not. So that's, you can think about that, because the parents are thinking generally only about getting their next fix or getting their next bottle of whether it's alcohol or some sort of drug, It says, according to one study of CPS caseworkers, 65% of maltreated children who had parents with substance abuse problems were maltreated while the parent was intoxicated. And also the substance most likely to be abused by maltreating parents is alcohol, alone or in combination with an illicit drug. And that's pretty sad. I grew up with kids whose parents were alcoholics. And, my parents were not alcoholics. They did not, as far as we know, unless they were closet drinkers. I never saw them with any alcohol. So, I had friends who had alcoholic parents, and how hard it must have been on them growing up in that situation. Just a lot of problems there with the parent who's just intoxicated all the time and behaving, just a lot of whole behavioral problems from this parent, because of the alcohol or drugs or whatever, right? It says, substance abuse also may be related to the recurrence of neglect. And studies have found that caregivers with substance abuse problems are more likely to neglect their children continually and to be referred to or re-referred to CPS than caregivers who do not abuse substances. Substance abuse also has been linked with as many as 2/3 of child maltreatment fatalities. And that's because people are not in their right minds. They're high, they're drunk, whatever. They're not using their heads. They're not thinking clearly, right? I don't know. I've been there. I used to use a lot of drugs until I was turned 21 and decided to get off of them. Never really was an alcoholic, but I know, what it's like to be impaired and you're not thinking clearly most of the time. And in having a small child around, obviously you're not going to make the proper choices, the proper decisions. So a lot of times people will drink and drive with their children in the car, which is just absolutely horrible, but it's done and we see this happening. And it's just people who are high on whatever kind of drugs, they're not going to be thinking about the child. And then if the child is crying or sort of steps out of line, the parent can't think properly, right? So they could hurt them very easily. And they're not really aware of their own actions a lot of times, I think. And so, this is the problem with that. And so many times, even if they aren't abusing the children so much as just neglecting the child, they're clearly their main thought is on the drug. That's the problem with substance abuse and alcohol. With parents, it's the child's needs don't come first. Obviously, it would be their own needs to get their next fix or to get their next bottle, and so the children just would come absolutely last in the whole thing, right? So that's the thing. It's very hard on kids. This strong relationship between parental substance abuse and neglect exists because substance abuse impairs one's mental functioning and can affect decision making. Parents who are abusing substances often cannot make appropriate decisions, such as preventing a young child from going out alone late at night or supervising their children adequately. And they also often put their own needs ahead of the needs of the child, such as spending money on drugs rather than on food for the child. So that's the thing, right? They're just not coping well. So substance abuse often co-occurs with other problems, which makes it difficult to assess its impact on child maltreatment. Parental substance abuse is likely to co-occur with the following problems that also are associated with child maltreatment. And they list them off here. They say a lack of knowledge about child development, poor problem solving and social skills, low maternal affection, poor attachment relationships, poor attention to the needs of an infant, disinterest in spending time with one's children, inconsistent disciplinary practices, social isolation, mental health problems, especially depression, anger toward or lack of attention to one's children, difficulty maintaining employment, engagement in criminal behavior, failure to provide appropriately for the needs of their children, which includes things like clothing, food, medical care, hygiene, and emotional attention, right? It says because substance abuse often occurs along with many other risk factors, it may be difficult for professionals to prioritize which services should be provided to families. Therefore, intervention programs for parents who abuse substances should focus on multiple factors. And that's for sure. So they go on to talk about it a little bit more. You can actually look at this. There's more information about substance abuse and neglect in families, right? They say, see protecting children in families with substance abuse problems at http://www.childwelfare.gov/pubs, pubs/usermanual.cfm. So there's more information on that for anybody who wants to go and check that out. Other parental factors, they say here, let's see. Mental health is another one. Mental health. Certain mental health problems in parents have been associated with child neglect, although research results vary on this connection. For example, some studies have found that when controlling for social variables in substance abuse, neglect, and depression are not associated. Other studies have shown a link between child neglect and serious or postpartum depression. Well, that's for sure. So, for example, mothers suffering from postpartum depression are less responsive and sensitive toward their infants and may be disengaged or withdrawn. Of course, numerous mental illnesses can affect an individual's ability to care for a child properly. As with any condition, mental illness occurs along a continuum of severity, right? And, it's just so important. And, so many people suffer from all kinds of mental illnesses and emotional problems and don't go out and don't get help for them, and they raise their children in this chaos and mess. Sometimes, I guess, maybe depending on the degree of the mental illness or the emotional instability, the child might be all right. But if the parent is really, not coping well and has a lot of problems, it will spill over to the children. I'm a prime example of that. My dad was borderline schizophrenic and also borderline personality disorder and depression. My mom was manic depressive and also abused as a child. So, the two of them together were like a disaster waiting to happen. You know what I mean? They had never gotten any help for their own issues, and then with their marital issues going on, they never got any help with that either. So it was a continual battle with them too, a battle with themselves and a battle with each other, and they were neither one of them content or happy the whole time that I knew them. And my dad is still living. He's 87 years old, and He's still mentally, ill, and he never did go get any help for it. But he does quite well. He copes quite well as an old person. It was when he was younger he had a lot of problems, especially when he was after I was born. Right before I was born is when things started to really spiral downhill. And then I came into the world, and it was just continued on. So parents who don't get help, and they suffer from these mental issues and mental illnesses. Back in the old days, it used to be quite a stigma surrounding mental illness, and even today there's some, but there's not as much as there used to be. Nowadays, it's like when people think, oh, I've got something, I think I might, be, have some sort of bipolar thing or something, right? Many times people will go get help now, and I'm so happy to see that because. That's what I said myself as, when I was growing up, because I grew up with people who were mentally ill. I said, man, if I ever start exhibiting those kind of behaviors, I'm going to check myself in and get some help, you know what I mean? Because there's no shame in it. The shame is in the people that don't get help. That's where the shame lies, is in these parents who will not get help, and they abuse their children or misuse their children, neglect their children because they have too much pride to go get some help, or they just think, oh, well, it's not my problem. I'm fine. It's the rest of the world, So it's very unfortunate because who pays the price? The children do every time, right? So, I thought, well, if I exhibit any kind of things that, that I noticed that my dad was doing, that I started taking on these behaviors, I would go and get some help. And I'm glad that I made that decision because, it's so important to know that help is available for everyone, if you can't find the right help, just keep looking. You will find it eventually, right? Whether it's counseling or some type of medication, whatever helps you to make it through the day and have a good life. We all deserve a good life, and your children certainly deserve a good life, and I know that I sure did, right? And so as an adult, I have the option, and that's why I realize that it is our responsibility to get help when we need it. And parents, too often times will not take that responsibility on. They avoid it, and they for many reasons, right? So it's pretty sad. Other parental factors they list here, other parental factors that may be associated with child neglect include age, education, gender, employment, criminal activity, and prior involvement with CPS. This research on young parents has focused mostly on teenage mothers. Low parental education may also be associated with neglect, and young mothers may be less likely to attain a high level of education, thus limiting their work prospects and leading to financial stress. Other risk factors for neglect associated with young mothers include substance abuse, inadequate knowledge of childhood development, and poor parenting skills. And just for anybody out there who thinks it's just only young people who abuse their children, that's absolutely false. My mom was 38 when she had me and continued to abuse me until I was right around 18 years old, which made her 56 years old. So it's not just young people who abuse children. A lot of times it can be anyone. It could be a grandparent, anyone can be an abuser. Abuse is a choice, and any age group, children can be abusers, right? Young people, old people, men, women, doesn't matter. Rich or poor, anyone can be an abuser, and abuse is a choice. So just so everybody knows that. So we're not picking on the young mothers. There's a lot of good young mothers out there, and I've met lots of them. And then there's some young mothers who struggle and don't realize that there's some good help out there, and it's unfortunate because it's so sad to see them ruin their lives, their children's lives, because they don't know enough or don't care enough about themselves to go and get help, right? And it's just unfortunate. It says because of a lack of employment is related to so many other risk factors for child neglect, it's not surprising that both maternal and paternal lack of employment just going to scroll down here, are associated with higher rates of child neglect. It says parents who have committed a crime also may be more likely to neglect their children. And again, this is maybe because criminal activity is linked to other risk factors such as substance abuse and poverty. And it continues on here, so if you want to read through there, you can. There's all kinds of good information here. So we have about a minute left. Thanks, everybody, for being here. They talk about child factors, age, special needs. We'll finish this off on Friday. So thanks for being here, and have a great night, everybody. We'll talk to you real soon. I'll be back on tomorrow morning, one child abuse survivor to another, and then again on Friday morning, one child abuse survivor to another. Make sure you check out Dreamcatchers Talk Radio here on Blog Talk Radio, www.blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers. And Elizabeth Brawley, Southern Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, will be on tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm going to be there. I'll be there in the chat room. She always has a great show, and she's so knowledgeable, and she's just a great lady. So I hope you will tune in and listen to what she has to say. She's a survivor, and she's very much a big-time advocate, fighting for children and standing up for children. And I just, she's a good friend of mine. So make sure you do tune into Dreamcatchers Talk Radio here on Blog Talk Radio. And if you need something, get a hold of me. I'll be on Facebook. You can send me a message here on Blog Talk Radio. And otherwise, we'll be talking to you again real soon. Take care, everybody, and have a great night. Bye-bye.